We are going to record this one, so it will be live. Hello, YouTube, in the future. It will be live at some point, so if people aren't able to attend, that they'll be able to watch this later. So to begin, Leanne and I are going to briefly introduce ourselves, and then we will hand it over to Matt so that he can introduce himself and begin his presentation. So I'll start. Hello, everyone. My name is Paige Ford. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Oklahoma. Almost finished. We're almost there with the PhD. But for OKPAN, my title is the Collaborative Partnerships Liaison for OKPAN, and my main role there is building relationships with the tribal nations in Oklahoma, and especially, and that's why we're doing this, to build programs, educational programs that amplify Indigenous voices in archaeology, and to help educate the public and archaeologists and students and everyone involved. So that's my role. I'll hand it over to Leanne so she can briefly introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leanne Wentz, and I am the tribal archaeologist for the Pawnee Nation here in Oklahoma. And I'm also on the OKPAN advisory board as well. And I just wanted to also reiterate what Paige said earlier, welcoming you all to our inaugural presentation. This has been, it's been an idea we've had for a few years, and we finally have been able to work on it and bring it to fruition. So we really appreciate you coming on board with us and being a part of this. And we really hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Mr. Matt Reed of the Pawnee Nation.
Noah, and like they were saying, my name is Matt Reed. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Pawnee Nation. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our history. I guess kind of give you a whole 101 view of who we are and where we're from and all that good stuff. I was talking to them earlier, and I'd been thinking about this. There's probably many of you out there that may not know anything about us, know our culture, where we're at, where we're from, or anything. So I'm going to kind of work backwards with this. Pawnee Nation is, we're easy to find. We're in Pawnee, Oklahoma, in Pawnee County. There's about 3,700 plus minus people in our nation. Our enrollment currently right now is like set at 1/8 degree Indian blood. We still use blood quantum to determine membership. As far as I know, we're kind of fortunate. I think there's maybe one other tribe in the state that still has like their traditional form of leadership that's been incorporated into their contemporary government. So we still have our Chiefs Council, which is called the Nasharo Council. And they have oversight over certain aspects of our tribal government, but generally speaking, when the feds contact us or state organizations or so forth, they're contacting the Pawnee Business Council, and we have a president, a secretary, treasurer, and so forth. We came here to Oklahoma, 1874. It's kind of an interesting or complicated history. There were a lot of circumstances that basically applied a lot of pressure to our people to compel them to move here. It wasn't a forced removal per se, like a lot of tribes had. And then when we did come, we came in 3 different groups. In the fall of 1874, we experienced an attack, a very bloody attack in a place called Massacre Canyon in Nebraska. And we're the reason why it's called Massacre Canyon. And so about a month after that attack, there was a group, I think of maybe about 300 Pawnees that from all of our bands that decided to come here to Oklahoma. And then within a year, the bulk of the tribe decided to also leave Nebraska and come here. And then at the close of that year, the remainder of the tribe came down, and it was a lot of people that were invalid or had some kind of a handicap or encumbered somehow that kind of needed help to get here. So by 1875, we were here in Pawnee, and we've been here ever since. If you come here to the town, you know, some of you may have been here for Veterans Homecoming Powwow. It's a big thing in the first week of July or last weekend in June. It's something like that. But it may seem odd, you know, we have this powwow, which is not ceremonial. There's nothing about it like that that's traditional, but it's held on a football field, which is kind of strange. What you have to realize is that that football field in the Pawnee County Fairgrounds, they were put on top of basically where we all lived for several years when we first came here. That was where our first agency was. And then eventually by, I think, 1876, 77, the Indian agent, superintendent's house for the agency and so forth, relocated to where they are right now, out on the edge of town. And so that kind of explains it. If you're familiar with Pawnee, you'll know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I'm just rambling. So, so our tribe, we're made up of 4 different bands. There's my band, it's the Chawee band. We have the Skeetees, the Pittahawidatas, and the Kickahawkees. And each one of those bands, you know, decades ago, were basically, I guess you could say, like a confederated group. Each one had their own chief's council and kind of operated independently of each other. But more and more, you know, with our dealings with the United States in the 19th century, we in that and with population decline because of diseases, pandemics, which we can all appreciate now, we basically kind of coalesced into one tribe. So that's where we come from and who we are. We still have a lot of our ceremonies. I think we're kind of fortunate in that way. You know, things like funeral feast, young dog dance, some of our war dances, which most people would be familiar with, is like straight dancing. Around here, everybody calls it war dance or tail dance. But that's like our traditional men's clothing, our traditional kind of protocols and ceremonies and so forth. That's something that we've always had. It's not something that we've acquired. But we've lost a lot of things, you know, like a lot of tribes, we're kind of struggling around with our language. We're fortunate right now that we have 2 linguists that were trained at OU, actual linguists, and so that really helps a lot because they're not only are they familiar and they're fluent speakers, but now they have that academic training to like create lessons and create. We created our own alphabet, you know, and that sort of thing. We're not reliant on somebody else outside of the tribe to do that for us. Our older religion was kind of focused and based on sacred bundles, which was our connection to our origin story, our stars, celestial beings, and I can get into that here in a little bit and so forth. But you know, as 1900s or so, it was what's the word I'm looking for? It was starting to become, I guess, stress put upon it, and then, you know, more and more as the 20th century advanced, that older religion kind of fell away a little bit here, a little bit there. But like I say, we still retain some of our bundles. We still retain a lot of our ceremonies. But you know, the most important thing, and what I've told people around here, is that our way of doing things, like our protocols and the way we function, you know, culturally as a community, we haven't lost any of that. It's real surprising to see how much we've retained. You know, when you're reading, you know, some kind of somebody's journal from say 200-300 years ago, and they're describing something with us, and I know what it is they're talking about because we still do it. So it's a pleasure to see things like that. But so I'll get a little bit into like our ancient history and well, before I go there. So we come from the Nebraska area. Our reservation that we had in Nebraska is basically Nance County now. When we left, they just incorporated that in its entirety as a county into the state of Nebraska. So if you look at a map, you go to Nance County, that's our old reservation. And that was essentially created in 1857 with a treaty that put us on that place. Up until that time, up until the 19th century, you could basically look at all of Nebraska, a big chunk of northern Kansas, the western edge of Iowa along the Missouri River, kind of that northwestern corner or so of the Missouri, up into South Dakota. You'll find Pawnee archaeology, stuff in Wyoming, the Front Range of Colorado. So it's a huge area that's our cultural landscape. And these areas that I'm talking about, you have to remember, I'm not just talking about the 19th century, I'm talking of 2,000 plus years of history. So there's a lot of our ancient ancestors that utilized these areas and traveled around and kind of left their mark on the land, whether it's petroglyphs or sacred sites and things like that. So it's a big area. And then, like, as I say, with our initial meeting with the United States and our interaction with the United States through treaties, our area it shrunk more and more and more, especially through treaties and land cessions, until we were left with Nance County, Nebraska, and then we gave that up and came here. So so let's get into our origin story. So our old way, our way of thinking is that we're descended from stars. They're the ones that created us. And so our creator is Titawahut, and I say creator, it's something more than that. It's not like when you say God in the Bible and you're talking about some kind of I don't know, Greco-Roman figure, sitting in the clouds. It's not like that. Titawahut is everything. It's everything around us. It's the essence of life, that mystery, whatever. And I catch myself. I say things like he, and it's neither a he nor a she. It's just this mysterious power. So it decided, that it wanted to create everything. And so at first it made these star beams. And you'll notice, especially if you come around here at Pawnee, a lot of our logos, regalia, everything that you can see that's associated with Pawnee is going to have stars on it somewhere. Usually you're going to see a big white star or a big red star. And the reason for that is that when Titawahut created all these things, these star beams, he got to a point he wanted to create people, and so he commanded the morning star and the evening star to make humans. And it's a long story, which I'm going to condense and not get into, but they create the first Pawnee woman. And when she's birthed, she's placed on the earth at a very specific spot in Nebraska that you literally can walk out there to it. But she was placed on the earth in a tornado, which I think is kind of unique amongst tribes, other tribes too. You don't see a lot of references to tornadoes in the creation. So, and then Titawahut commanded the sun and the moon to create the first Pawnee man. And then that boy was also placed on the earth in a tornado. Which my office is so messy, I misplaced things. Somewhere here, I've got an oral history that I'd come across about 3 years ago that told me the exact spot, and I haven't been able to find it again since. So I guess when it's time for me to find it, I'll find it, but it's here. So from those two, first man and first woman, their children and their offspring become basically the Pawnee Nation. There's other places in Nebraska around Nemaha that say our creation or tied to the creation of our South bands. So if you remember, I was talking about were made up of the Skeetees, Chawis, Petawidatas, and Kikahakis. Those last three bands are referred to as the South bands. And so their creation, their formation as bands is tied to that area around Nemaha, Nebraska. And so over time, they're plentiful and they expand, they become us. There's other stories that we have that's based in that ancient time, that talks about a Pawnee man that has a dream, and in this dream he goes to a big mysterious river and sees this mystical creature that's like a combination of other animals that's swimming around in the water, and it seems so real to him that when he wakes up, he's compelled to walk off, towards the east and find this river that he had seen. And so when he gets there, lo and behold, he finds this river, and then he sees this same mystical creature, and he jumps into the water and he grabs it, and it takes him underwater, and it takes him to this animal lodge. So this will play into our bundles and stuff. But when he gets there, these animals, they teach him how to make sacred bundles. They teach him how to make earth lodges. And so by using stories like that, our oral history, it places us in a context with archaeology that if you go to Nebraska, Kansas, these areas that I was talking about, and you're looking at the footprint for early earth lodges, I know that story, some of the, I pause to give definite dates. I kind of speak in hyperbole sometimes. In my mind, and looking at carbon-14 dating for earth lodges and sites, and I tend to round up. I kind of say that it's about 2,000 years. That's how old that story is, and it places the creation of those earth lodges about that time. So it gives you kind of a context for these different archaeological cultures and archaeological phases that you see on the Central Plains. And we know that we were there before that because, one, our origin story says that when we were created as people, this is where we were placed. And so looking at sites that are even older than, say, what's called Central Plains tradition with earth lodges and so forth, I know that those folks that live there without ceramics and without earth lodges, that they're still our Pawnee ancestors because that's where we've always lived. And so, when we do NAGPRA repatriations and reburials and so forth, we really kind of encompass a huge time frame and thinking of people as our ancestors and as Pawnee people. Whereas a lot of archaeologists and anthropologists are probably a little hesitant to say those people are Pawnee or they're Pawnee, ancestral Pawnee or so forth. So our definition and how we use, to identify people is a little bit different than what probably mainstream academia is comfortable with. And I feel like I'm jumping around. So, we have another story that is kind of placed in that same ancient time that talks about a Chawi man that takes off wandering to the west and comes to a natural lake in the mountains and sees another mystical animal, and this animal takes him to another animal lodge and there teaches him these ways. And on top of this mountain, Evening Star, who's the mother of all Pawnees or Pawnee women, she comes down and touches the top of that mountain, and this is where she gives us the seeds for corn. And she takes this man to a cave, and in this cave is where all of the buffalo spring forth onto the earth. And so through her, we're given this gift of our corn, and our buffalo, and how we were able to sustain our population and become so populous and strong. And he takes all this stuff back to the people and teaches them how to plant, teaches them these things. And there's one of these sacred bundles that's created around that story and that place. And that place is Pikes Peak, and there's a natural lake there just west of Boulder, I believe it is. And so, because there's not a lot of natural lakes, around. So it's something to be able to look at our ancient history and tie it to certain locations and certain places And then in certain times, you know, when you're talking about, let's say, earth lodges or something. So our history is very ancient. It's very old. And we've never really lived any other place. So we've got like migration stories and so forth, but that may not, you know, dealing with oral history is kind of foggy sometimes because they're not necessarily talking about us as a whole people. It might be just be talking about this one band. It might be talking about a band that no longer exists because of disease and warfare. So you kind of have to take all these things into consideration, especially when you're looking at our ancient history. But I take great pride in the fact that when somebody says Plains Indian, that we're the Plains Indians. You know, a lot of other tribes, and you know, I don't know who all's out here and what tribes you're from, and I don't mean any offense or anything, but a lot of other tribes that come out onto the plains, you know, they migrated there from somewhere else because of population pressure from Europeans back east or so forth. But I think we're real fortunate in that at least we still live on the plains. We may not live in Nebraska. We own land there now, so we're literally part of Nebraska, but at least we're still in the same area. There was a thought crossed my mind, and now it's escaped me. So like talk more about our history. You know, as the 19th century, you know, kind of comes around. I remember what it was. Talking about our ancient people. Around 1600 or so, our folks like broke into two groups. And so the group that we're in now, you know, we become what's known as the Pawnees, but then the other group becomes the Arikara tribe. And so if you are fortunate, I don't know if there's any Arikaras on this or not, but if you're ever fortunate enough to meet somebody that's Arikara and can speak their language, it's mutually intelligible. There's you know, some slight pronunciation differences, but when we get together for you know, cultural visits or so forth, you hear somebody speaking Arikara, I can understand what they're saying and everything. The Wichitas are also our relatives. Wichita, it's kind of funny. When we hear Wichita, it sounds like they're speaking Pawnee, but we don't know what they're saying. I guess it would be maybe like English-speaking Americans and someone from, you know, Cockney from England or something. You know they're speaking English, but you may not understand what they're saying. So we share a lot of customs and similarities with those people. And, you know, when you think about the traditional cultural landscape for those two groups, you know, it's a huge swath of the central United States. You know, the Wichita is all the way from central Texas up into Kansas, and from east to west, you know, from those eastern forests, you know, and Arkansas all the way over to like nearly New Mexico, and then all the way up into North Dakota with the Arikaras eventually. So at one point in time, you could have walked across the plains and north, south, east, west, and run into the people kind of speaking a similarly intelligible language. Probably our cultures were probably a lot more alike further back in time. So it's an interesting thing to think about our ancient past. We still have, you know, I made reference to the Arikara visitation. That's something it's, I hate to say ceremony, it borders on ceremony, I guess, that we've had off and on since they split from us. We've recently tried to reinitiate it again, but the pandemic's kind of interrupted that a little bit. And we base it, at least on our end, we kind of base it with the similar relationship that we've had with the Wichita that's never stopped. There's no telling, we have no idea how long this has been going on, but we have something that's called the Kuskahadu. And the Kuskahadu is basically, that's Pawnee for like saying a nice visit. So this visitation with the Wichitas, we didn't get to do it last year. Oh, so I guess I have to take it back. We did stop, but we kind of skipped that because of the pandemic. And I'm not sure if they're coming up here this year, or if we're supposed to go down to Anadarko to visit them. But in a nutshell, it's like a 2-week long visit. And during that visit, there's a lot of one tribe will play the host, the other tribe will play the visitor, the role of the visitor. And, you know, whoever's the host, you have to take care of your guests. And so every meal, morning, lunch, evening, is provided for by the host to the guests. We play hand games in the evening, which is probably a little bit, if you're not from outside, if you're from outside Oklahoma, and even some tribes in Oklahoma, hand game varies depending on which tribe you're talking to. So we play hand games in the evening, and then in the middle of the week we have a ceremony that we go through involving tobacco, and then at the end of that second week we have basically like a giveaway dance, and the hosts will give gifts to the guests, to the visitors. And so, you know, the next year we swap roles. And so like they'll come up here and they'll be the visitors, and then we'll go down there the next year and we'll be the visitors. And so I found, oh my gosh, historical references that date back 1600s, 1500s, that kind of reference that. A lot of it revolves around, used to be a lot more complicated ceremony, probably associated with a Pawnee ceremony called the Haku, that some other tribes call them county meds or Wawan. But it's a multi-day ceremony. It's probably the closest thing you could relate it to. And then I've been on sites in the middle of Kansas that date to the 1840s. You know, that was a Pawnee teepee camp. We left these teepee rings there, and we're fortunate that the landowner, when he came in and homesteaded it, for whatever reason, he took great pride in having that on his land, and he refused to plow it. And then when his family eventually sold it in the 1950s, the next landowner felt the same way. And so they don't, I think the most that's ever been done there is that they cut hay off of that site. And so it was pretty pristine, and they preserved a lot of it. And then right next to it, within easy walking distance, maybe 75 yards, is another pre-contact site that's Pawnee, based on ceramics. And so we know that we visited that area for a long, long time. And that camp, the Pawnees that were there in the 1840s when the Army came along, they were coming back from visiting with the Wichitas at Anadarko. So if for whatever reason our ancestors that were there in pre-contact times, if that's, you know, a trail that connected us up in Nebraska with our Wichita relatives in southern Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, it kind of gives you an idea of how long that ceremony has been going on. So it's very old. So I'll fast forward a little bit. In the 19th century, we're probably really well known as being scouts for the Army. You know, there's a lot of literature on the Pawnee Scouts. And I want, if you leave here with nothing, I want you to know that when you hear Pawnee Scouts, it's not the same thing as like seeing Indian Scouts, you know, in Hollywood movies or in other literature. Other tribes, you know, they had scouts, but they were usually like, I guess you could say like contractors or mercenaries, whatever you want to call it. They were paid. They weren't actually in the Army. They were just paid by the Army. Our folks were actually in the Army. We were recruited. I think the first time was in 1864 in Nebraska. The first company of scouts or troop, if you're in the cavalry, about 100 men. And we were fortunate, and the reason why it worked so well is that the officers that were assigned to us had grown up there on our reservation at where Genoa, Nebraska is now, and could speak fluent Pawnee. You know, they had been little boys running around and playing with Pawnees, so they knew it was like a second language to them. But of course it was a second language. They were very fluent. I guess that's what I'm trying to get across. So it worked out really well that when they would issue commands, they issued commands in Pawnee because they could think that way. And there was no hesitancy at the execution of those orders. It worked so well that slightly after the end of the Civil War, 1866 or so, they went and recruited 2 more companies of Pawnee Scouts. So all in told, I believe we had a company of scouts for each band. And so I think company or troop A, company A were the Skeeties, and I'm not sure which companies were the other 3 bands. But we played a major role in a lot of the warfare in Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, and Wyoming. If it wasn't for us, they never would have built the Transcontinental Railroad. There was a period in time there where attacks by other tribes that didn't want the railroad coming through, they had stopped them, and it wasn't going to happen. And then so they brought out our scouts and to guard them and keep them safe. And that's how they finished the railroad across the plains. So we don't really get a lot of acknowledgement in history books for that role, but it's a true fact. I'm not exaggerating at all. Those scouts, they basically, off and on at different contingencies that spread out across the frontier, served in the Army up until we left Nebraska in 1874. And then once we were down here in Oklahoma, there were some Pawnee guys that served with the Army down at Fort Sill, but they were serving on their own. So they were more like the classic idea of a scout. They were just paid individuals that weren't enlisted per se. But then in 1876, we were brought in once more. The commander of the scouts was Frank North, a man named Frank North. And Luther North was the second in command. But Frank North came down here to Oklahoma and recruited 100 plus Pawnees, and they walked from here up to Ark City, I believe was where the railhead was, and then rode the train up to Nebraska to Fort Robinson, where they were issued arms, ammunition, uniforms, horses, gear, saddles, and then went up into Wyoming, into I think the Powder River area, where they fought against the Northern Cheyennes and Sioux and whatnot in that campaign, and then came back to Oklahoma, came back with a bunch of horses that they had captured, which is something that we're known for. Yeah, I'll get back to that here in a minute. But so that was the last time that the Pawnee Scouts were actually active. But then not too long thereafter, we had at least one Pawnee man that was enlisted in like Roosevelt's Rough Riders, and there's a very famous photo of him sitting on horseback with his Rough Riders uniform on after they came back from Cuba. So, and I say all this, I'm talking about all this because it really epitomizes the role of veterans and that capacity as a endeavor for men to do in our culture. We put a lot of pride in our veterans. A lot of our ceremonies, a lot of our cultural ways, all geared around warriors. A lot of family names have the word hawk in it, and that hawk is a reference to the anthropomorphization of people as a bird. It's a warrior. A hawk is a warrior. So it's something that's really, really deep in our culture, and it continues to this day. So like I was talking about our Pawnee Indian Veterans Homecoming, the homecoming is to welcome all veterans, back home from service overseas. So that kind of give you an idea of how deep that is with us and how long we've held on to that. Where was I at? Yeah, I'm kind of running out of steam. There's a lot more, but it would work better if I took questions. I can kind of answer things that might stir up some more thoughts and stuff. I feel like I'm just spewing out information at you.
No, you're doing a wonderful job as always, Matt. So please don't worry about that at all. But it would be good. I mean, we've got time, so let's take some questions. I do want to thank you for your presentation because I was writing furiously some notes down about things because I didn't know. I mean, I don't know a lot about Pawnee Nation, so it was really good to hear that perspective from you. So I appreciate it, and I'm going to turn it over to Paige to ask the first question.
Yeah, so everybody put your questions in the Q&A and I will choose from those. I have a question that I'm going to ask everyone that presents in this series because I'm interested and I think a lot of folks in attendance will be too. So, because we have a lot of archaeologists in attendance, but we also have members of the general public, folks who don't study archaeology but are interested in archaeology or interested in tribal histories. And so I wanted to get from your perspective, especially with Pawnee Nation, of why it's important to learn and understand tribal histories from the tribes themselves. And I think Leanne had a similar question that she was going to ask, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on why you think, especially for archaeologists, because I'm selfish and I want to know why do you think it's important for for archaeologists to learn the types of histories and the things like you're teaching us today?
Well, I kind of made reference to it earlier when I was saying that a lot of people like hesitate to say that these people are Pawnee. There's a tendency to, I guess, like categorize people and time periods, and then they don't want to make these connections with modern folks. So, like I was saying, to us, we can look at things and these. I'm trying to think of like some of the not so obvious people. Nebraska phase people, Smoky Hill phase, Upper Republican, It's Cuddy, Lower Loop, Redbird. I'm even starting to look at Pishopaw people that are down in southwestern Kansas, southeastern Colorado. That there's characteristics of these people that we know that they're our ancestors by looking at how their material culture and how they lived and so forth. And being able to like with that Kuskahadu, being able to put things in context, like why would we be traveling over here or doing these things? It all starts to make sense when you know that, like, the importance of corn in our culture with its connection to star beings and deities and so forth in our religion. Then you see the importance of this site. It's not just a cash pit. This cash pit held this very important food that was given to us by the Creator and so forth. I guess that's why, and I'm fortunate, I guess. I was just reviewing a guy's thesis, and he had used a lot of the classical literature about Pawnee's history, and especially in the early 20th century, historians really, well, and anthropologists for that matter, wrote a lot of material about us, but probably never met a Pawnee. It was based off of stories from other tribes. It was who knows what it was based off of. And usually when I look at this, sometimes they get some stuff right, and then sometimes they don't know what they're talking about. Like, there's no way that what they're saying is true or even remotely true. So some of the histories that I see come across in, say, reports, where you have to do your, I'm trying to think what it's called. There's a name for it. There's like a cultural aspect to each one of these little surveys that comes through across my desk in 106. Sometimes they're kind of funny because it's like, you could have just went to Wikipedia and pulled that up. You're not telling us anything. And then they have a tendency to make a separation between Pawnee people and Upper Republican people, or these different cultures, when all in all they're talking about the same group of people. It's just one's 1,500 years old, one's 100 years old. It's the same folks. So Hope that answered the question.
It did. It was great. And Leanne, I don't know if you're looking at the questions, but I am. And we've had several roll in. I know you spoke to some relationships with other tribes, including the Wichita. And we've had some folks asking about other relationships that you might know of. Specifically, people have been asking about relationships with the Osage, Comanche, Ponca, as well as I'm trying to like scroll through so that I answer everyone's question all at once. But other relationships with the, tribes in Oklahoma, and then also other Plains tribes, I think is what people want to know.
It's going to get complicated. Yeah, at different points in times, we have different kinds of relationships, I guess is how to, we're all well aware of that. Our ancestors didn't always get along. I think we're also fortunate in that a lot of our neighbors today were our neighbors 200, 300 years ago. There's Poncas that live just up the road. There's Poncas that still live in Nebraska. We share a lot of, their cultural landscape. I was talking about like migrant tribes. Their cultural landscape now overlaps onto ours. It just depends on what time period you're talking about. You have to, and right where I'm at, this is all Wichita country. So if I look at pre-contact sites, I know it's Wichita. We all have to kind of like acknowledge that overlap and that relationship. And then culturally, we have interesting relationships with a lot of different tribes. I was just talking with another Chawee relative here. His grandpa was a singer over with the Osages at their Alonchka, here in Oklahoma. Probably, oh my gosh, 1900s, 1910s. Enough that there wasn't a bridge across the river. They had to drive a Model T across sandbars to get over to Osage County. So, we have a long relationship, just modern relationship with our neighbors and so forth. But then you go up to Nebraska, there's some Oto sites that are right next to Pawnee sites. I think we're fortunate that we're still neighbors with the Otos. We've had, there's no telling how long we've been living, pretty close to the Otos, at least a couple hundred years. And then there's other tribes that don't live anywhere near here, up in the Dakotas, that were our traditional enemies. I don't think we're enemies now, but you have to acknowledge that we have some a long history of fighting. I guess I'm just going to say it like that. And we had that similar relationship with Cheyennes, probably Arapahoes. I don't know about the Kiowas. There's one historical reference in the 1830s. It's a Chawee Earth Lodge village up in Nebraska that, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess on how you look at it, you can drive right through it because there's a highway through it. But I've been to that site, and we're fortunate that there's like 3 or 4 different written accounts of that village. I say village, it's like 2,000 plus people that live there. It's not really a village. But in one of the accounts, they talk about this Kiowa man and Kiowa woman that were visiting, were living there in somebody's Earth Lodge, but they knew the Americans that were writing it, described how different they stood out in contrast because of their clothing. And they knew that they were Kiowa. So, what was that relationship? Why were they up there? Was that somebody's relative? Like, I'm sure they just weren't on vacation. So, there's things like that you just have to wonder. We'll never know the answers to things like that. So,
Matt, and I've got another question here from Sophie. She wants to know, she doesn't know if you mentioned already, but is Pawnee Nation matrilineal or patrilineal?
That gets complicated because of acculturation. Long time ago, my personal opinion, and it's based a lot on our old ways and things, history. that we're matrilineal. You know, you trace your family through your mom. That's I know I'm Chawi because my mom's Chawi. Well, my dad's not even Indian, so that makes it real easy for me. But and then every woman in my mom's side of the family goes straight back. Oh my gosh, I think the oldest one now we're like almost back to the 1700s with the people that we know, and I know that they're all Chawi. Now this name back up here, that's my grandpa. Indian way is my grandpa. European way is my great grandpa. Um, he was Pitahawidata, but he married somebody that was Chawi, so that's how I know he come from that band. Some people today they would say, "Oh, I'm Pitahawidata and Chawi," but the way I think, I'm just Chawi. There, and then with missionaries coming in, with our population, this is something that I left out. I'll digress here just a little bit. In 1800, there was probably roughly estimated about 30,000 of us. By 1880s, we were down to 500 people. And so when you see that much of a reduction in your population, and with the stigma of marrying somebody that's your relative, you have to marry outside of the tribe. So you get a lot of non-Indians. That's how that gets brought in. You get a lot of intermarriage with other tribes. There's tons of people that are Pawnee and Oto, and that's why. So with that, with those missionaries, if you're wanting to identify as your Pawnee blood, you may have to go through your dad's side, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the modern way that it's done. And then now, so many people, you take your surname from your dad, and so there's a lot of inheritance like that. That it's kind of we've adapted it from Americans or Europeans. So clear as mud.
That's great. So we have, I know we have a lot of grad students, and we have some faculty in the audience. So I wanted to ask you this question that my fellow grad student Delaney Cooley asked in the chat. How does or can archaeology support Pawnee sovereignty on the Central Plains? How can we help contribute, support Pawnee Nation and their sovereignty?
Man, that's a deep question.
Question. We're getting complicated now.
Well, I kind of hate this. Every time I turn around to some complicated question about 106 work and sovereignty, it always comes back to a pipeline somehow. With like Keystone XL, they wanted to come across Nebraska, and we're going through sites. This last episode with them, they were wanting to go right through the middle of an Earth Lodge village that I don't think anybody had ever excavated it. It had been plowed, but there's, potential for a lot of information there. And I think I'm safe in saying that a lot of these companies, and maybe some government agencies, they really don't want to listen to tribes. It slows down the project that they're working on. Or they would have, it would have to change it, and they don't want to change it because it's a lot of work. So by archaeologists coming in and helping, document sites and authenticate who it was there, with us, or without us, it helps our sovereignty, because then we're able to say, hey, we're a tribal, recognized tribal government. This is our cultural properties that you're starting to destroy, and you need to listen to us. And we're not saying, well, on that one we were saying stop, but we're not always saying stop your project, you can't ever do this. It's like, let's work together, let's figure out a way around that to kind of mitigate whatever kind of damage is going to go on. In that way, I think it helps our tribal sovereignty. It kind of backs us up and gives us a little bit of teeth that we're not just making stuff up. Especially, when you take like our songs, a lot of our songs, that's part of our old history. They tell stories about specific historic episodes. But like the stories that I was telling you, here's something that's a couple thousand years old. Some of them may be older than that. You know, when you can back that up with archaeologists, you know, like, oh my gosh, if it's not verbatim true, it's pretty dang close, so close enough that you need to kind of listen and maybe rethink what it is that you're about to tear into with a backhoe. So yeah, that's how I think how it helps our sovereignty.
And going off of that, Matt, and this is a question kind of that I have, and you've already spoken to a little bit with the histories, the cultural histories from the 106 reports. And I know you've seen journals and probably books written about Pawnee Nation and the people and everything. And even today, seeing that from, you know, hundreds of years ago, but still seeing it today, people writing the same thing, using the same sources over and over, and they're not right. You know, how much damage does that do to the nation and to y'all's history?
It just makes my job harder. You know, so this guy, this student, I'd hate to say young man, but he's younger than me. You know, he sent his thesis over here for me to kind of look over and review. And, you know, any of you that work in a TIPO or CRM, you know how busy it gets. And so you have to kind of stop, put the brakes on to do this sort of work. And, you know, then when you look at it, it becomes like a huge ordeal because he got most of his information. Some of it was just flat out, that's wrong. Some of it was like, it's close, but you ought to think of this, or, you know, so it's like misinformation. You're constantly putting out little fires and trying to re-educate people. You know, the same thing, it's similar like with movies and popular culture. You know, how many times do you have to go around and correct something that somebody learned from Dances with Wolves? It's like, good night. It's a great movie, but it's just a movie. It's not fact. So yeah, did I answer your question? I got lost.
No, you answered it. I know it's difficult for tribes, even just with the you know, the little experience I have with Muskogee Nation. It's constantly telling the people the same thing over and over again because they're looking at those histories that where even archaeologists today don't even talk to us or any of the tribes, right? And so unfortunately that gray literature is just used over and over, and that's, you know, they'll write whole books about the tribes and yet they've never actually talked to the tribes. So
one of the frustrating things is that because it's in a book, it gets more credibility somehow than if it comes straight from me. And
exactly,
you know, that was the case with this, you know, and it's nothing, I'm not, if he's out there in the audience, I don't mean this the way it sounds. It's nothing on him, but you know, it's like, okay, I just told you that that's not right, and they want sources. I'm like, well, you know, I'm basing this source off like, I don't know how many oral histories I've read or songs that I've heard and been explained to me in places that I've been and seen and put it into context of ceremonies and our theology and all this. It's like, there is no source. Like, all the sources are wrong. You're going to have to take my word for it. And it's like, I might be able to track down all this, but good Lord, I might spend a month doing that, and I don't have time for it. So yeah. And I don't know why. I guess, I don't know. I guess that's part of like Western thought. That's the big difference between, and it's weird, you know, coming from a college where I got my master's degree, it's weird to say things like this, but it's that difference between Western academia and non-European thought process. You know, it's like, well, what's your sources? This guy that's upstairs that's been a singer for all of his life, that's one of my sources. Yeah, and I don't know, it's bizarre to be put in that position. I'll get off my soapbox.
No, that's great. I think we'll leave it at that. I encourage everybody that's attending, if you have more questions, you know, you can reach out to Matt. We can put you in contact with him, or you can find his information on Pawnee Nation's website. That's where we found. Well, that's where I found it. I don't know where Leanne found it. I think Leanne probably already had it. But
and just one more thing before we tie off. So when you go to Pawnee Nation website, we have a history section on the internet. I didn't write it, and I need to correct it really bad because it has some bad information on there. So don't rely on that. Just go to there, find the TIPO page, and get my email and get in contact, and I'll help you.
Yeah, because we know like this, you know, scratches the surface, of course, of Pawnee Nation's history, and we appreciate you coming on, Matt, to teach and talk to us about it and answer people's questions. And like I said, I really do encourage, you know, anybody in attendance, if you have more questions, you know, reach out to Matt directly. Be on the lookout for more announcements from OKPAN and from us for more of these lectures. Maybe we'll have Matt back again.
Sure.
Maybe.
Yeah, anytime. Well, I say anytime. Let's make sure I'm not busy.
Yeah, and Leanne has put
Oh, cool. Thank you.
his stuff, his information in the chat box for everyone. So you can write his email down. He's pretty prompt at emailing, you know, for how busy a TIPO's office is. So I definitely encourage everybody to reach out. And you can reach out to Leanne and myself as well as OKPAN if you have more questions about the series and upcoming. And we're so excited to be able to have you. Thank you again, Matt, for coming on and teaching us. It was amazing. Yeah.
I have one more thing, just thank you, but also June 9th, we already have Bryce Obermeyer with the Delaware Tribe. He will be our next presentation. So June 9th, Wednesday at 1 p.m., we're going to be having these twice a month. So please put that on your calendar and we'll have that sent out as well. But again, thank you. And Paige and I both put our emails in there as well if you want to get in touch with us. So Matt, you're awesome. Thank you so much again for being here and being the first one to do a presentation. So.
Also, sorry everyone, I have made hopefully the chat box available to see. If not, I will send out an email with all of the information so that you have it in your inboxes and can reach out directly to Matt. Yes. Great. Okay, everybody can see it. Thanks, Sharon. Okay. Thank you again, Matt, and we will see everyone at our next Tribal Histories lecture.
Good to see you.
Thank y'all.